Is Trump going to have to run for the White House from prison? Who knows anymore, but the sentencing got another little twist and turn in it today in his 34 felonies criminal conviction. As we all know, Donald Trump was quote-unquote convicted of 34 felonies that I've explained at length were effectively paperwork misfilings. And even then, I don't even know that misfilings does it justice, because some commentator was saying, well, if you're going to pay off somebody hush money, which isn't illegal, by the way, what else would you file it under? The problem that the very, very partisan hack Alvin Bragg, the district attorney in Manhattan, said was, well, he didn't file it under the correct filing and therefore it's a problem. But he filed it under attorney fees, which was to reimburse his attorney for the payoff money. It's a whole thing. The whole thing is bogus, by the way. It effectively accounted to a misdemeanor FEC filing mishap, which somehow turned into 34 felonies. We don't need to get into the whole thing, even though it's pretty much an entirety of the brief explanation of it. But today, Thursday, August 15th, Judge Merchan responded to Trump's attorney's requests to recuse himself, and he said, no. If you're not following this super closely, briefly, Judge Merchan of Trump trial fame, specifically, he has I forget how many cases Trump related came in front of him, but it's an inordinate amount, and somehow he got attached to all of them. But in this particular 34 felonies BS Banana Republic case, Judge Merchan responded to the Trump attorney's call for his recusal, saying emphatically, no, I will not recuse myself. The case that the Trump attorneys were making was that Merchan's daughter worked for a consultancy firm that was running Kamala Harris's campaign in 2020. Now, I happen to think, kind of knowing the political consulting world pretty intimately, that actually is a decently big thing. You can make the case of like, oh, his daughter donated to the Kamala campaign. Like, yeah, I don't think that's really that big of a deal and need to recuse yourself. But the consultant firm that was running Kamala Harris's campaign, remember, there were like, 10, 12 people in it, meaning that there were 10 to 12 consultancy firms running presidential races in 2020 on the Democratic side. And if they're that thinly spread, what I'm saying is there's probably a pretty intimate relationship between Kamala Harris and the firm that was running her. In other words, she probably knew directly or talked directly to Merchan's daughter, which in my opinion is not really so disconnected that there wouldn't be some sort of bias there, if that makes sense. Obviously, Kamala Harris is the Democratic nominee for president of the United States, despite having no votes to do so. But that being said, I think the relationship between Merchan's daughter and Kamala Harris is probably closer than the media is making it out to be. But apparently all that's completely a moot point, considering Merchan said, no, I'm not going to recuse myself, denying the Trump lawyer claims. Now, where are we at then in this? Will Trump go to jail? When is the sentencing? September 16th, the sentencing for the trial date, or for Trump's felony convictions, is set for September 18th, which is scary close to the presidential election. And I think there's a couple debates even scheduled after that. Can you imagine if Trump got sentenced to jail on the 18th and then did a debate from the prison cell and then effectively ran his campaign from the prison cell? Holy cow, that would be a monument shifter. And we'll talk about the politics of that in just a little bit. But interestingly enough, 2 days before that is when Judge Merchan will actually decide if Trump's case is viable. Because between Trump getting quote-unquote convicted, I have such a difficult time saying that, convicted, between him getting convicted and now, and the sentencing, the Supreme Court has unleashed a ruling about presidential immunity. And it's now up to Judge Merchan, who has not going to recuse himself and is clearly a partisan hack, it's up to him to decide whether or not that Supreme Court ruling has any effect on this particular case. Does presidential immunity matter at all regarding this quote-unquote hush money case, which is really just a paperwork filing case that for some reason turned into 34 felonies? All that being said is that September 16th, the judge is supposed to decide whether or not this is even a viable case to begin with. And if he does say yes, he's not immune. In other words, this can continue. Then on September 18th, Trump is supposed to be sentenced for his egregious paperwork filing crime by, again, a partisan hack. Now, to the politics of this, I think it's fascinating how this is going to shake out. If Donald Trump does not have any significant penalty to pay, and remember too, the sentencing could be rather harsh because Trump, let's just say a convicted person in general, if they show contrition, if they show that they think they did what is wrong and they're sorry and apologetic, the judge can issue a lighter sentence in most cases, outside of mandatory minimums and all that sort of stuff. But Trump clearly did not show any contrition at all. He's like, no, this case is entirely BS. And he's right, by the way. But given the fact that that sort of attitude does have an impact on sentencing, it could be that the judge says, well, we're going to issue a harsher sentence because this guy has no remorse whatsoever for the crimes he committed against man and the American people, which again are felonious and BS. So it could be that the punishment is rather harsh. If September 16th goes through and Donald Trump can, according to this judge, be tried for this crime despite presidential immunity, and then two days later get sentenced for any, for harsher than what first-time offenders are usually sentenced for, you might have a really interesting political question on your hand. First things first, he's not going to serve any jail time, especially before the election. I would imagine that even if he was convicted and had to go to prison according to the sentencing, if he won, this stuff is all gone anyway. If he doesn't win, I would imagine, for the sake of the country, that Kamala Harris would be like, yeah, this is a stupid thing. Let's just go ahead and pardon him and let him live the rest of his days at Mar-a-Lago, right? That would make the most sense. But even then, I think this is going to be, regardless, thrown out on appeals, and you won't have to serve the sentence until the appeal process is entirely done. I would imagine they would issue some sort of stay on the sentencing. On the sentence itself until the appeals process has worked its way through. All of that being said, politically speaking, I don't know what would do what in what scenario. If Judge Marchand says, well, Donald Trump clearly is a menace to society and needs to be punished roundly, and therefore needs to serve, 6 months in jail. I don't even know if that's an option on the table. I would imagine, from a polling perspective, Donald Trump would get a huge benefit from that sort of thing, which is hilarious and ironic because Judge Marchand clearly hates Trump, and by punishing him for this felonious, dumb indictment / conviction, he would in effect help his political presidential campaign. Now, the other way around, if Marchand says, well, you have to do, 30 hours of community service or something dumb, like a slap on the wrist, let's just say, the same kind of slap on the wrist if an illegal immigrant beat the hell out of a U.S. citizen, say it's something like that, just not really a penalty at all, then I wonder Kamala Harris and her campaign would clearly jump on that and say, Donald Trump is not above the law. And even though this right-wing judge, which just of course wouldn't be true at all, even though this right-wing judge gives him a slap on the wrist, the American people won't have it. And then maybe that hurts Trump's campaign. So again, ironically, The judge that hates Donald Trump could give him a lighter sentencing, which could hurt him politically. Now, the fact that the legal system is involved at all in the political process is very concerning. It should be very concerning. I know my rosy attitude doesn't necessarily convey a concerned feeling of how I actually think this is going to play out, but the fact that we are in this position to begin with is absurd. And I think serious people from other countries, but even from our own, is looking at this situation in its entirety going, what in the world is even going on here? But I guess we'll see. September 16th, September 18th will be pretty big days, especially when it comes to how it affects the presidential race. That will be a month and a half away from the sentencing of a former president.